And Miriam, this is
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is a very never done before moment. We call it a fireside conversation, and I have invited 3 previous podcast guests, and we have a live audience from the Never Done Before community. So around the fireside, we have, in order of appearance on the podcast, Alison Coward, Rebecca Sutherns, and Sunny Kagami. Welcome back. And you are all muted.
Oh, I'm not muted, am I?
Yes, wonderful.
Well, people often wish I were, but I'm not. It's nice to be.
Yeah, thank you for coming back. And
thanks for having me back.
And by tradition, I don't do big introductions of my guests. You've all been on the show, so in the audience, they can listen to our one-on-one conversation. And today we're speaking about collaboration. And it was inspired by several conversations that I had with you, and especially by the observation of, I think it was Rebecca, that we facilitate collaboration. We're facilitators of collaboration. And most facilitators seem to facilitate alone. So what is it about collaboration that makes it so difficult that it needs to be facilitated, and that it's so difficult for the facilitators of it themselves?
We're all making space for each other. Who feels compelled to lean in on that? Yeah.
Well, I can start and perhaps kick off with a thought starter that I think a big misconception about collaboration is that it means that people are working together all the time. And actually, great collaboration is a mix of being together and being alone. And a conversation that Rebecca and I had just now was around needing to find your own voice in a collaboration. So I think, to be a great collaborator, you have to be really clear on what you're bringing. And sometimes that means taking a step back and being on your own in order to be able to give fully and effectively to collaboration.
That's interesting. So go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh,
Please.
no, I was just going to say that thanks for that. I was also thinking about how the facilitator of collaboration and the collaborators, I mean, in a sense, I don't like that false separation, because the facilitator, in a sense, becomes one of the collaborators, or at least influences it. But it is kind of a different job. So as much as there's an irony to me of I'm a facilitator of collaboration who works mostly alone, and from what we know from the recent session lab research, most of us do, or at least those that answered do. But I think that I also go, it's a different task. Like it's and the task that we do as facilitators may not need to be a group task. It may work fine to be an individual task, as long as we understand our role in that sort of broader collaboration. But I do think it's very helpful for us as facilitators to be good collaborators in something. So I've been really putting myself in the role of participant more lately, because I've had this kind of narrative of how much I don't enjoy being a participant, how much I don't enjoy participating largely in poorly facilitated sessions, and I get very frustrated, and so I just avoid them, frankly. And I'm really trying to put myself back in a situation of having lived recent experience of being a participant and a collaborator, because I am notorious for the supreme irony of my work is that I am notorious for hating group work. And so that's probably why I got into it, was to try to make it less terrible. But I also still, if I'm honest, I do avoid it. So I work with groups, but I'm not that great in groups. And I'm learning that, or I'm forcing myself to get back into that. But a few different points there, but those are the kinds of things that are floating around for me today.
Yeah, there are so many different points. So that's why I was trying to find the thread. There's one interesting thing that has bubbled up, because what you said, Alison, is also really interesting. And Rebecca, your yes and is super helpful. So I'm thinking about multiple threads, but one of them was, you said you avoid it. And so there's something interesting in there, I think, not just for you, but for a lot of people, because there's something sort of fundamentally icky and challenging about what can ultimately be intimate interactions with strangers or with groups or with pairs or with people that you just met or you don't like. I mean, it's complicated, all those dynamics. So it's funny that, like, when you were saying the irony of your work is that you avoid group work, I understand that. I can relate to that personally, and I think a lot of people can. And so there's a thread there that might be interesting around why do we avoid it? Like, Miriam, your first question was what makes it hard? Was that your first question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's something intriguing about unpacking what does make it hard for you too, you know?
And if I understand, if I remember well, Sunny, you don't facilitate alone.
I always facilitate with someone else. Yeah. But I had to learn that the hard way. And also that's a function of our facilitated design experiences are very multisensory. And so they're kind of high productive. There's a lot of productivity, high production value. So it partly requires it, but also holding space is energetically taxing. And over time, I just learned I'm better in every way when I have a good tango partner, not just any old tango partner, but a really skillful one. But so is that, and actually that does go to my other question. Well, you go ahead.
If you have a question, then you go ahead, because I would.
Well,
I
when
would
you
also
said
have a
work,
question.
yeah, I know. You and I always have questions. When you said work, I didn't know what you meant by work. Like, did you mean leading a room or being in the room, or doing other kinds of work that facilitators have to do to get good at what we do? I wasn't sure how you defined work. You know what I mean? Alone, working alone.
And maybe this ties to the question that I had, because I love the distinction between facilitating in the room alone and doing other work alone. Because, for instance, myself, most of the workshops that I host them alone. And I actually enjoy that. On the other hand, just yesterday I had an epiphany, and I realized that doing the work, so working on larger projects, for instance, now developing a course, I don't enjoy to do it alone. So I do need a team, I do need sparring partners, and I do enjoy the exchange of ideas. But then when it comes to the moment, I think to find this one tango partner, as you called the co-facilitator, maybe that's so difficult. Or where is the distinction that is what is doing the work alone versus in a collaboration, as opposed to facilitating in the room alone or in collaboration? How's it for you, Alison?
Yeah, there's definitely a distinction, and I really liked Rebecca's viewpoint that we may be facilitating alone, but that's just a specific role within the wider team or the wider group. The other thing that sort of came to mind was, I wonder if as facilitators we may avoid collaboration because generally a non-facilitated collaboration does go badly. So unless we know, or often goes badly, unless we know that it will be a facilitated process, then we're not really prepared to put ourselves in that, because collaboration is difficult. So I know it's very difficult for me. I think, so, you know, going back to what Rebecca said, it's very difficult for me, if I'm not playing the role of facilitator, to be in a team that hasn't designed their collaboration and not to bring some elements of my facilitation knowledge to that.
Yeah, they call that the curse of knowledge, you know. It's painful. It's painful to be forced to participate in a poorly designed experience when you know better. It's like the surrendering is really painful. Is Rebecca, is that why for you it's hard?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I think about it when you were talking about having a really skilled tango partner, and I love that metaphor. I think chosen collaboration with chosen collaborators feels different than if you are, thrust into a situation with folks you may not have chosen. And that challenges me too, because I would prefer, I think, to choose, and yet my commitment to, for example, other values such as inclusion and diversity and the challenge that, one of my sort of semi-evidence-based theories is that the reason that diverse teams are more effective than non-diverse teams is because decisions reached by a diverse team are hard won, right? Like they've had to work hard to get to that consensus, whatever it is.
I love that.
And so I need to remember, like, I feel like there's a clash of values for me, not just in a work alone or work with other people, but also in terms of work with people I choose versus people I may not choose.
Yeah.
And that there's a link there also in the quality of facilitation, because like has been said, I used to think I was a really bad participant, and I learned recently that I'm a good participant in a well-led process. I'm just a poor participant in a poorly led process. So
Fair enough.
But who isn't? That's why we're
Yes.
needed, right? Most people are bad at participating in badly designed processes, and that's why, facilitation exists.
Yes. And I'm fascinated by what Rebecca just said about the collaborating in a non-chosen team. And isn't this what we expect from the group we facilitate? So
Exactly.
yes, I assume that we are top facilitators who actually choose a design and an approach to make it easy for them. But what does it actually mean that we know how difficult it is to collaborate with a team that you have not chosen? And then especially to force a group to do that, if maybe in their usual day-to-day work, they don't collaborate.
I'm seeing a 2x2 here.
tell us what's in your head, Alison. Go ahead, draw it out.
Good and bad designed processes versus known participants, unknown participants.
Right. Well, and I think I'm seeing things too, because so I'm a good participant under any circumstance. Let me say that. And the reason for that is because I have such deep empathy for the person leading who may be early in their craft and doesn't know what they're doing yet. And I needed that when I was that person, when I was a young facilitator. I needed forgiveness from people. So I still remember being that person. So I wouldn't say I move into full cheerleading mode, because that's just irritating, but I definitely am supportive because of empathy. And actually, I think that can become a weakness. So I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so fucking great. I'm just saying like, that is something that I notice about myself. And then, and when I'm, well, you said, tell me again, you're a bad participant when process is badly designed. Oh, and because I try to make the most of it, right? So that's because I feel like that's what we're asking them to do. Like, even if we haven't showed up and done something that is skillfully designed, I'm still asking them to just make lemonade, right? So I do that too. And so I don't know. I think I would feel terrible if I made it harder on other people, because people have done that. Have you ever facilitated facilitators? It's a nightmare most of the time.
Yeah.
And you know it. And so if I'm in a group and I'm facilitating facilitators, I'm always like, you guys, you know what it takes, like support me. That's what we do. We're supposed to be yes and types, it doesn't mean we don't have critical thinking and we can't analyze and understand process breakdowns, but I do think that the spirit of it is to be setting people up for success, even with crappy circumstances, So I'm just throwing that out there.
How do we define bad participant though? What do you?
Right. Great question.
Does that mean
I'm going to pick on that
intentionally?
when I say bad participant, I don't know. When I say, I think it's actually what Sunny was just saying, helped me clarify that in my own mind. I think I actually show up as a good participant. Like I think people around me would think I was. I think it's the internal experience.
Internal, yeah.
I hope that's true. I think that is true because I'm hating it, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping that I am willing to show up and do the work, do the supportive stuff, do the empathy, all those things you just listed. I'm not an overt resistor in a group because I know how awful that is, but I think I am speaking more of the internal experience. So thank you for helping me make that distinction in my own head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that sounds reasonable. Yeah.
And I love the observation that facilitating facilitators can be very painful. It's like herding cats. Sometimes someone said it's not even like herding cats, it's like herding squirrels.
But I think the thing is, sorry, Miriam,
I
think the thing is with, if you're facilitating facilitators, which is a bit of a mouthful, then I think instinctively the facilitators are also still facilitating. They're kind of, waiting for people to speak and they're responding with questions when actually, you don't always have that. You have the interruptions, you have the people being disruptive, and you have the kind of clashes of opinions. And that's also what makes a kind of really resonant experience.
And I wonder whether this is because we learn so hard to facilitate and not participate. So hiding behind questions is so easy, so we don't have to become real. And we have our facilitation authenticity, which might be just yet another mask. And then actually stepping into this space of true vulnerability of participating, where we suddenly contribute with our ideas instead of hiding behind questions. Maybe it's a muscle that we forgot training.
I have to just say, and this is the thing that I'm doing now, right? So I have a friend, Jonas, who has put together a group of people that he likes, and we come together on a monthly, we call it a co-think jam. And I've been finding in those sessions that I've been a dominant participant and I've been speaking way too much. And I wonder if it's the jack is out of the box. The lid has come off, and I'm all of a sudden participating, and I'm that person that you need to kind of say, good point, Alison, but can we just hear from...
Yeah, but maybe the enthusiasm is just authentically there. I feel excited for you, but I understand what you mean when we become the archetype of the person that normally we would tease. But I was thinking about what you said about facilitators, how they can add to it. Totally. And I think that does go back to the internal orientation of the facilitator. It's like, are they wanting for me to be successful? And, and like, that's not always the case with humans are complex, and they have schadenfreude, and they have like bizarre, longings that are just true. And so I always am grateful when there are facilitators, if we are facilitating them, because I do think you're right, Alison, it's such an unfair characterization that they're just heinous to facilitate. It's just always been my experience, but I probably wasn't noticing the ones who were actually doing benevolent and supportive things, and I was just focusing on the ones that irritate me. I'm sure that there's the good stuff too. That's awesome.
And I can definitely relate to what you observed in yourself, Alison, that once I'm not in the podcast host role, I love talking. I love sharing my own ideas. And then to a point that if I'm on someone else's podcast, I have the impression that I don't leave any space for the host. And then I wonder, would I actually enjoy this kind of guest?
But that sort of goes back to something else Alison said about voice. I won't be able to use your language, but it was related to expressing and articulating your voice. And could you take me back to that comment you made? Do you remember it? It felt important.
I think it was around, in order to be an effective collaborator, it's important to know what you're bringing. And sometimes that takes space on your own to really figure out what your perspective is, what your expertise is, what your contribution is, so that you can then give effectively. And I think I found that myself. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment. I'm sort of very close to the end, and I found that I have written the book based on a few years of me really processing my point of view. And there was a point when, you know, it would have been too much to invite along that process of developing my framework and methodology. There came a point where it's like, I need to do this for myself and on my own. I need to know exactly the laser focus. I needed to do that. And I think, you know, when you're a good collaborator, you start to know, and I'm not saying that I'm a good collaborator, but a good collaborator will know when it's time to retreat and when it's time to step forth. And I think we generally, within the workplace, we haven't developed that fluency to be able to do that yet. I think we need to, because I think we also haven't developed the language around collaboration. It's just a big buzz, fuzzy word. And yeah, once we really start to nail what it is and understand what it really feels and looks like in practice, then I think that aspect of understanding when people need time alone will become easy. I mean, I think there was some research from Harvard Business School that spoke about intermittent collaboration. In fact, I know because I've written about it in the book, intermittent collaboration, and it talks about, you know, groups that get together and they have these kind of, they call it bursty collaborations. They have these moments of kind of like intense collaboration, but then they go off on their own and they have time to process and develop their own work, and then they come back together and then they retreat and come back together. And that's, for me, what real true collaboration is.
Mm-hmm. It was an aha moment for me when I started reading about collaboration and realized that a bunch of the literature on it is kind of making the case for it. Mm-hmm. And I realized how much time I spend with folks and, you know, self-selected group lots of times. I mean, there's lots of reasons for it, but I'm working in contexts where the people generally do want to work collaboratively. They see value in doing things together generally. They probably wouldn't hire someone like me if they didn't. I probably, you know, there's lots of reasons, but I feel like I spend much of my time where in situations where collaboration is assumed to be the default. We may not be good at it, but we kind of understand the value of it potentially. And yet the literature in collaboration, not all of it, but a lot of it is written in contexts where collaboration is not the default setting. And they're in fact trying to persuade people that collaboration is a good idea. So I'm thinking of some work that came out of the accounting and legal space where the systemic factors in those professions make it a very competitive environment where collaboration doesn't have clear benefit in terms of the reward system that they're embedded in. And so the book, well written as it is all about trying to convince the reader that collaboration can be a good thing. And I found that really interesting, but also just foreign territory for me. And it led me to a tool that I use in my facilitation now about helping people kind of self-identify where they sit on a collaboration spectrum between it being their absolute default setting, in which case as a strategist, I'm much more likely to say, tell me why you're at that collaborative table or why that partnership is still useful to you. Or if you're at the other end of the continuum, which was like, why would I bother collaborating? It is so annoying and slow and inefficient and I think helping people, including ourselves, identify where they sit on that range can be a useful starting point too for how to enter into collaborative arrangements that make some sense.
And I would love to double click on that, having in mind building on what Alison said previously, that there's so much fuzz about collaboration, what it actually means. Mm-hmm. So what are the two different spectrums of collaboration? So what is our understanding? Is there one understanding when we speak about collaboration in the framework or context of facilitation?
Like one coherent understanding, unified.
What is yours? So when you speak about collaboration to your groups or clients, let's talk about the groups. What do you mean?
Are you asking me?
Ask about the three of us, of you, or four of us.
Yeah.
Get us started, Sunny, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about some of the things y'all touched on, like if I guess you think visually, Allison, and because you were doing the 2x2. So I'm doing that too. And I'm thinking about the different layers of it. So if I looked at it like technically or sort of process oriented or whatever, but my default sort of physiological understanding of it is really that it's an orientation and it's a state of mind. That's how I start. And I love the spectrum, Rebecca, that you were sharing, because I also do a lot of spectrum plotting, like play with the ends of spectrums and look at gradations and all that. And I think of it as a spiritual practice, which I know sounds very out there and strange. So by that, I simply mean that there's a sacredness and a holiness around how it should involve respect for others, just a baseline of respect and a dignity that is a shared understanding of humanity or shared humanity. And so I think of it as a place from which your mind is oriented, and out of that place, all the tools and methodologies and frameworks are very, very useful and valuable, and they can be mobilized, and they, should be. But it starts at this sense that other people matter, that their opinions and perspectives matter, that we are better together, at least temporarily, like to your point, Allison, that it is like you can come and you should come apart and come back together. But for me, it really is an indication that someone has metabolized the idea that you're not an island, and that there's this sort of generative capacity that happens when you put human beings together and ask them to attend their energy and attention to something. And so I know that's kind of grandiose, perhaps, but that is, I think, why when you're looking, Rebecca, at the literature about like making the case, I think why we have to make the case for it, not in all environments, but in many, is that people are so hyper individualistic, particularly in this culture, that we don't even remember that other people exist and that they matter and that their voices should be included. Like we have to actually make the argument for that, which in a way is kind of heartbreaking. But that's a whole other conversation, I know. Yeah. Was that helpful? Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
When I think about how I do a lot of strategy work. And so the ways that I describe my almost requirement of it being a collaborative process to say a new client, for example, I find myself using both buy-in and blind spots as the two kind of organizing reasons why I'm a fan. In addition to that broader frame that you just gave us, Sunny, which was really helpful around the shared humanity piece, because I think there's such hubris in thinking that we know what to do by ourselves. And so this idea of all the different ways that we can have blind spots about things that are helped by other people's perspectives and wisdom is really important to me. And also the buy-in, which it's not even a word I love, but it's one that people kind of get. But I think the idea that people are much more enthusiastic about implementing decisions that they had a part in, even when that decision negatively affects them. That's the hook, or the interesting piece of that research, I think, is that even if a decision is not awesome for me, if I was part of the process of identifying how that decision was made, I will be feeling better about that decision than I otherwise would have. So I think for me, those are the two. When I think about just kind of naturally what comes out of my mouth when people say, why are we going to do this way? Those are the two things that I tend to highlight. I think there's lots more, but the, reflexes that I have verbally about that.
Awesome.
I think for me, I'm sort of looking at it through, I guess, a very pragmatic, so this is just one lens that I'm exploring now, but when I think about it from the team point of view, it's almost a conversation around vision and what's the end purpose, and clarifying that. And when there's a clarification that that end vision or that purpose is much greater than our one individual contribution, then that for me makes collaboration much easier to buy into or for people to understand. So it is all for me with collaboration, it really is always about taking a step back, and I think sort of bringing some of the things that Sunni explored around the fact that we are better together and other people's opinions matter, and pairing that with the fact that, you know, specific aspects of society are hyper individualistic. In order to really underline that, it helps for people to see, well, in what way can other people contribute to something, and what is that something?
Mhm.
And before I ask the next question, I see Emily Touche raise her hand up.
Yay.
Hi, I was curious to ask, what is a time you successfully co-hosted or co-designed a workshop, and what contributed to that being possible?
Mhm. Is that accurate that you facilitate alone, Miriam, and Rebecca and Allison? Do y'all also facilitate alone? Typically?
Typically, but sometimes not. Yeah.
So maybe I could touch on that one then, because I only co-facilitate. Emily, that was your question. Okay, well, so that's all I do is co-facilitation. It's partly a function, as I mentioned earlier, about kind of multisensory experiences, which by that I mean we have toys, we have games and toys and visualizations and large scale panoramic, you know, we like make it as three-dimensionally interesting as possible. So there's partly a function of that, but also and I think this is probably the most interesting piece, because there's the piece around stewarding a group. So also group size, because I've done 5,000 people and 500 people and 4 people, and even if it's like 10 people, I'll have 2 people to meet to, you know. But mostly it's because of the thought partnership that happens prior to the experience, because I am a font of ideas. I have ideas coming out of my wazoo, and I have books and that help me get those ideas, and it doesn't matter. I need another person's heart and mind and gut integration to help me make my ideas better. And I know that, you know, like I just know that. And I think that's but there's trust involved, and there's experimentation, which is why I love your community, Miriam. I mean, I just love the tenderness of people trying stuff they never tried. It's just so important, so important. And so I'm not saying it's successful every time. Like there's times when I'll co-facilitate and I'll be like, well, that's the last time that will occur, you know. And it's not because anybody's wrong or bad. It's just because maybe the chemistry isn't quite right, or the worldview is different, or whatever. So there is testing. So you don't test those in like high risk environments, you know. But I do it because it makes my practice better, and it makes my experience better, and it makes the audience see themselves differently in different people. So the participants, they may not relate to me or connect to me, but they might relate or connect to that person. So there's a ton of reasons to do it, not related to cost, which is also relevant, you know, if you're a facilitator. Yeah.
And I must say, when I co-facilitate, what I love about that, if it works, it is really like a dance. And I think it works especially well if you have complementary skills and really can add to each other and have this just little bit of friction that is creative. And where you also respect each other enough to challenge the ideas, and not only yes and also dare to deviate, and sometimes say, nah, maybe this is not such a good idea. It's difficult to find these people.
It is. Rebecca.
I appreciate the distinction between the collaboration that happens in advance and the collaboration that happens in the room.
Yeah.
And I've had experience with both, when both things happen in one engagement, and also when it's only ahead of time, not very often when it's only in the room. But I think that changes it too, you know, of what level of challenge happens where. And I have a colleague that I'm working with right now, and we're sharing a client, but she and I so far have never shown up in the room together with that client other than on Zoom and planning meetings. But the overall project involves her facilitating some pieces, me facilitating some. And sometimes that's been by design, and sometimes that's just a straight calendar issue, you know, but it's a collaborative project, and we are co-facilitating the project, but each individual experience has been individually facilitated. So I could see it lots of ways, but I think back to Emily's question, the first example that popped into my head was a time when I was co-facilitating with a client to lead a session at a conference together. And the aha for me there were two things. One was the different level of credibility that it brought to have two very different people co-presenting in that sense, because people who really saw her credibility as in this case, it was a municipal government employee at a government conference, brought a different level of credibility than I would have. And then I brought other kinds of credentials that she didn't have. So I feel like it was a better ticket, right, for the two of us than one. But one of the specific ways that it was tricky when I think about that creative tension that Miriam mentioned, in my book, Nimble, I talk about being a highly improvisational style facilitator or a highly orchestrated one, or somewhere in between. And this client of mine and friend would fall in the highly orchestrated end, and I would fall in the other end quite naturally. And so it was tricky for she and I, because she was mapping out a facilitation plan that was, at 10:21 a.m. we will do this, and 10:24 a.m. we will do this. And I was getting so stressed ahead of time. And I said to her, I will disappoint you. Like, I can't live up to this level of expectation. I just can't do it. And I think I will stress you out. And, so we had these really good conversations about the shared goal was to lower stress. And for her, lowering stress came from that level of detailed agenda. And for me, lowering stress came from not having that kind of agenda. And so that was a really helpful learning process for us, and made the subsequent collaborations much easier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that for me is a key. We were talking about sort of the concept of collaboration, but that's a key, and that's a key part of collaboration, having conversations about those different working styles. It's fundamental to making it work. And this is where collaboration often falls down, when people don't have those conversations and understand that people see things from different perspectives and need different things in order to feel secure, safe, or confident. And just that understanding can make or break, or lack of can make or break.
That's right. And yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
Also, whether someone is planning well ahead of time as opposed to last minute, and how to find the beautiful balance that one is maybe pushing the other one to be a little bit more on time and accountable and structured, and the other one calming down the other one, that we don't have to set everything in stone before it has happened.
Yes. And like Emily, one of the other things I was thinking about when I recently did have an experience with everything about us was different except for one important crucial thing. So our planning stages were different. He started like 6 days before an event. That would be like a nightmare for me. I've done it, but I charge a rush fee like nobody's business, and I resist doing it at every step of the way. I'm like, you don't want me to do it, I won't be happy. Like, I'll tell the client, I won't be glad about it. You won't be glad. Like, I'll try to talk them out of it. But if I have to do it, I'll do it. But he was just like, 6 days, plenty of time. I was like, wow. And then his process was really different. It was very engineered. He's an engineer. So it was like really just like linear. There wasn't a lot of brainstorming, ideating, kind of kicking ideas around. It was like, here's my plug and play modules, which is good for expediency. So I was just, and so, but there was a point when I realized, I just need to observe how he works, because I'm horrified right now, and I'm not going to be effective if I'm in this state of concern. So I was just like, I'm going to kick back. And then, and at some point I just surrendered to everything, because I love the improvisational on the spectrum of orchestration, improvisation. I think in your early career, orchestration it's tight because you're scared, and that's normal. And then over time, it typically tends to loosen, hopefully not to the point of just sloppiness, but to the point of what I call virtuosity, where you're basically your adaptability quotient is very high, and you're just going to go with it, and you feel good. So I did surrender at a certain point, and because it wasn't, there was a lot of reasons why it was possible to even do that, but that is helpful. It does help to not resist. So like if she had that tough conversation and the woman was like, I don't really care that you're stressed and I'm going to take care of me. Basically, I'm going to prioritize me and not you. That's going to cause some deep, deep stress for Rebecca. She's going to lose sleep for sure if that freaked you out already. And so he wasn't that guy. He could be responsive, but it is unpredictable in some ways when you're testing out a new partner. And I do think at a certain point, like surrender is actually an option where you just go into the waves and see how, and because you're not going to die, like no one's actually going to die, which is not a good benchmark, but did you want to say something, Emily? It seems like, can they talk too, or? Oh.
I mean, I think thank you so much for all your answers. I have a lot of interesting, juicy stories and experiences to mull over now. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
That was a great question. Good question.
I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at Michael Bungay-Stanier's new book called How to Work with Almost Anyone. It came out about 10 days ago. And he and I were chatting recently about the book before it came out. And one of the things that he talks about is relationships he's talking about interpersonal relationships at work in that context, but I think it fits here because he talks about them being safe and being vibrant and being repairable. And, I'm really sort of playing with that typology. I appreciate him articulating it the way he did, because it kind of picks up on what you were just saying, Sunny, about, the stakes may be high, but they are not often life and death high. So let's remember that, keep things in perspective, but also that chances are there's going to be friction, there's going to be rupture, there's going to be so I think if we go in with an expectation of messy and real and human, but also that can be really life-giving, and that there's some parameters that would make it safer than others would, other ways would. I'm just finding that arrangement or that sort of typology helpful. And I think the reason I appreciate it is because he grounds it in the conversation or multiple conversations about how are we going to work together. And so picking up on what Alison said, having that conversation is critical. It may be ahead, but it may be as you go along, right? To say, how are our working styles complementing each other or not?
And then I think there's also the self-awareness that takes for one to know what one's style is in order to have that conversation. And I think generally all of us could get better at that. Some of us are better than others, but I think generally there's definitely, and then once you know what that is, the willingness to be challenged on that as well, which is, what you've both been saying, Rebecca and Sunny, around knowing, if you're high on improvisation, how much you are willing to work with a structure, or if you are high on structure, how much you are willing to improvise. And for me, those are the juicy, exciting conversations. That's what collaboration is.
Yeah.
Right. Having those conversations around those things, and where you negotiate and where you don't, and what your parameters are, and what your boundaries are, and being able to have that conversation. That's, for me, I think that's where there's so much opportunity for us, generally in our personal relationships and in the workplace. I find that really exciting.
And what this brings to my mind is actually the distinction between collaboration that embraces what you just explained, Alison, about really getting real, and that requires a high level of self-awareness and the vulnerability to be honest about it with ourselves and the other one. Because I think many facilitators, me included, struggle with a cognitive dissonance that we want to be these collaborative, open-minded, yes-anding individuals, and still we are human, and sometimes we are just not, and sometimes we have bad days and we suck in collaboration. So collaboration being this grounded in self-awareness on the one end, as opposed to collective thinking. Sometimes we just need to think together, and I think that's what we often use in workshops, and that we might need in the work or collaboration that comes before the act, is having someone to think together. Brainstorming is not really collaboration, it's collective thinking. Did this distinction resonate with you? I just made it up.
Yeah, I could see that distinction. I mean, I think of collaboration as a higher order function, and collective thinking is a sort of subcategory of a broader umbrella, you know. But for me, one of the threads, or two of the threads, is that there's a safety there. So, you know, because if you're thinking collectively and you're trying to actually polish or refine ideas, you do need to feel that people are receiving and returning back to you with that baseline of respect, and that they're actually attentive and interested. So there's that shared, you know, understanding. But are you saying, Miriam, that sometimes you don't feel like being this, you know, the generous, radiant being that we're all capable of, but not often, and that you want to go to collective thinking as a still functional use of time together?
What I was referring to, that in order to be a collaborator, we really have to be this wheel to ourselves and to our potential collaborator. And that in most of the times, what we actually do or need, we don't need or require the true collaboration very often, but collective thinking is just enough.
Yeah. I think I'm going to say something that I want people to kind of perhaps challenge me on and disagree, but I think sort of listening to this conversation, I think for me in my mind, there's a very clear distinction around collaboration, in that it has an outcome. The collaboration isn't just us, you know, bouncing ideas off. That is the collective thinking, that's brainstorming, and we can get together and we can do that and we can kind of have a nice time. But for me, collaboration is about creating and producing something together. Otherwise, it's just a nice kind of conversation.
I think it's funny that most humans would rank themselves higher on self-awareness than they actually are. Right? Yeah. And so
that's,
you know,
actually a stat from Tasha Urick's book.
It's true.
Insight, exactly. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think about this because I'm feeling very sort of cautious about sort of making any statements that sound like I think I'm self-aware, when I'm really probably overestimating that quite dramatically. Yeah. So I can get very prone to being a bit academic about such things, and I go, does anybody actually care? If we started kind of developing this really fine like typology of levels of collaboration and stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that I think we do. I think we do need to define collaboration, because I think that's the reason why people don't get it right. Because so many things, people use the word collaboration so widely and so loosely that nobody knows what it is anymore. So I think we need to, like within the workplace, I think we do need to be clear on what we mean by real, true collaboration. Sometimes, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's kind of well known that sometimes people are saying it's collaboration when people are cooperating, or, you know, people are contributing. No, let's call collaboration what it is. When we're truly collaborating, that is collaboration. And if it's not, then it's not. I'm gonna put my stake in the ground here.
No, I like it. What would you call it? Because I'm trying to think of an instance when I wouldn't concur. So I think I share that perspective, but I wonder, what would we call it if it was goal lists or outcome lists? What would just be called play? Like, what would we call it?
A fun time.
Like purposeless play.
A fun time. And those things are okay. I think they're absolutely fine. I mean, you know, I'm very I think this is where I don't, not that I don't collaborate, but I'm very specific. This is kind of me knowing my contribution. But when I'm asked to facilitate workshops, if you want a facilitator that is going to create an experience that is just about the day for you, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not me. I am a project-focused, project-led, outcome-led facilitator. When you want to get things done, get me in. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with those experiences, but I personally, you may be sort of thinking that you're collaborating on the day or sort of getting together, it may be collective, but for me, collaboration has that specific outcome, like something tangible, and I'll be quite, very specific about that.
And does the outcome need to be co-created through collaboration? Because I'm thinking of two co-workers who can collaborate on an outcome, both working individually. So one writing the code and the other one designing the packaging. Does this make sense? No, but you know what I mean. So
but at some point, would they not have needed to get together to talk about what that end goal is meant to be? And so for me, that is a collaboration, because it feels like they would have had a conversation about what they're trying to achieve together, but then they realize that their skill sets are placed in a very specific part of that collaboration. They go away, do their thing, and they do have to bring it together at some point.
But I think of that as just cooperation, where it's like task related. They know what their end game is. They're in different lanes, and they're not necessarily coming together in the interim to create a generative space. So I just think of that as coordination, but you can challenge me anytime, because I'm just making that up. And also there's the question of cooperation, and you said, contribution. Yeah. So now I actually want to parse all of these differently and sort of affinity cluster them and stuff, because they have different natures, or they wouldn't be different terms. And I'm sure y'all have a perspective on them, but yeah, I'm just throwing that in there. Because if there's not a we, the third entity, so what I call the we, where you, me, we know our strengths and so forth, but we come together to create a different entity. If that's not part of the process, then I'm not sure I would call it a collaboration. I would just call it a coordination or a cooperation. But I just made that up, so I don't know. What do you think? What do you think?
Making me think about, I don't know if you're familiar with there's something called the spectrum of engagement that the International Association of Public Participation puts out. And when you're doing community engagement in that sense, it's arguably not really engagement if it is just sharing information, and then it kind of goes through this continuum of collaboration through to real empowerment. And I think there's times when having that kind of really distinct typology helps us to be much more precise in not just our language, but in setting expectations of what our role will be in a space. And in that case, it's really about who decides stuff and who holds the power to make decisions. And at one end of that spectrum, it is, I'm just telling you something and I'm not transferring any agency or power to you in that. And the other end of the spectrum is the opposite of that. But most of us, at least in my world, live somewhere in the middle. And even the words in the middle of that particular spectrum, I get all mixed up. And so partly maybe that's where I'm coming from, to say the academic sort of analytical part of my brain goes, well, we need to be precise about this. And I'm a fan of using precise language, but I know that in my search for precision, I can lose people. So in the case of the writing that I do, sometimes some of the feedback I get is that was the precise right word, but if we're trying to go in a more plain language kind of way, let's say that a different way. And I wonder, how do we translate that idea into a facilitated space to go, in what contexts other than podcast fireside chats would we actually talk about how would it be accessible to participants, to clients, to collaborators, to say, I'm interested in this kind of thing and not that kind of thing. And so, I think that's where the tension is for me, is not to be imprecise or lazy in our language, but to make it accessible. And I don't know how well we're doing on that quite yet.
And I wondered whether there is a different place and audience for the different levels of precision. So I agree that as facilitators and within the community of facilitators, especially when we collaborate, it's extremely important that we are precise in what we mean when we use these languages. Also, when do we want the groups to collaborate or to co-create or to just to cooperate or to just listen to each other and to collectively think? I think
This is what them all to show up. Can you all just come, please come?
Just come up and listen to me.
All the words that start with CO, and really it's just
Right.
And maybe the boss can come and read out an email.
Exactly.
So I think when we, in terms of design, so in order to design the experience that they need or the process they need, we have to be precise, whether they need to know what we're asking them to do. Whether I don't think that a group or a client that hires us is interested in us explaining them, okay, in this part we'll collaborate, but this part, I think the cooperation part is more important. I think they will kick you out after 5 minutes.
They are interested in what Alison was saying, which is there an outcome, a tangible deliverable? Is there an actionable thing? They definitely are interested in that. And then what you said, Rebecca, earlier about buy-in and blind spots. I know they're interested in buy-in, and blind spots, they would be interested in clients I'm talking about. They'd be interested if there was some sort of related to product or service innovation. They're like, what do we not know, or market trends or whatever. But do you find that clients are interested in blind spots relative to self-awareness?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it depends, just like with any of us, right?
Yeah.
On any given day, how much feedback do I want? But I think where it comes up for me is maybe a step in between, not so much market gap blind spots, could be that, or self-awareness, but probably the blind spots that get filled by having voices from multiple departments, say people with different types of expertise, different people who have different parts of the story, sort of filling that in, even internally on the various teams that might be represented within an organization or corporation. So I think there's insight to be gained at all of those levels, internally, and then internally in yourself, internally across your organization, and then potentially externally through various kinds of stakeholder engagement or market testing or whatever it might be. So I think all of those contexts offer the possibility of seeing things from a new angle that can help. Ultimately, my assumption, my assertion is that multiple perspectives are protective, they up the quality of the thing, whatever it is. And so that's why I would, at whatever level, that's why I'm a fan of saying, even just things like you want, it's a quality assurance question in some ways, if nothing else. And so I don't always talk about it in terms of a self-reflective moment for a client who may or may not want to do that. It may be something as sort of instrumental or technical as you don't want to miss stuff.
Yeah, that's compelling. It did beg another question. Oh, I had another question. So I think I don't know if it's by nature like an innate thing, but I've always been a collaborator, before I understood that was a thing and a skill. And my husband is really competitor. He's a competitor. And we can't play games together because I just get so upset because he's just so mean. Like, I think he's mean, and he always changes the rules. Like it feels a little shady. Like it gets a little shady to me, like in his quest to win, it feels a little unethical. And so we just argue and it's not fun. So I was thinking about, in terms of what cases do people make against collaboration? Like, what have y'all heard where people say, and I know you did actually mention some, Alison, or maybe it was you, Rebecca, about inefficiency and all that, but like, what kind of like ethical case could somebody actually make against, against being inclusive and collaborative?
And I don't know, I mean, I'm thinking of an example with a client conversation I had today, and he would not speak out against being inclusive, but what I heard was a variation of, I want people to do, in the context of his company, I want people to behave in my absence the way I would behave if I were there. Not the way they would behave if I were there, but the way he would behave when he's there. So there's this idea as the company owner and founder that his mindset is that he sort of wants a whole bunch of clones of him to be running the place, exactly as he would do is one of his goals for this particular project that he's asked me to be involved in.
Wow.
And I was thinking about that maybe more in terms of diversity than I was in terms of collaboration, but in that case, there are lots of people that are going to be involved in this project, but it feels more like a transfer. It's almost like literally take his hard drive in his head and transplant it into other people's heads. And yet he sees it as a collaborative project because we are inviting a bunch of people to a bunch of meetings. And in my head, I was like, this, fair enough. Well, if that's what we're doing, that's what we're doing. But it's not a collaborative process. It's not a co-creation of anything. But yet there are lots of humans in a room together, or there will be. So I'm not sure that he would overtly be anti-collaboration if I said it in those words, but it's just one example. And I think another example is in highly competitive environments where the desired outcomes are not shared outcomes. They have not been framed as shared outcomes, or they have not been structured or incentivized as shared outcomes. They've been set up as individual outcomes that are kind of zero-sum game oriented, right? So there's only so much to go around, and if you have more, I have less. Most of my world isn't like that anyway, so I'm not that worried about it. But I think if you're in a space of real scarcity or perceived scarcity or a zero-sum kind of framing, collaboration doesn't always make sense.
I think it's such an interesting point, particularly your first example, Rebecca, because I think when I'm speaking to leaders of teams in particular, one of the conversations that comes up is that tension between inviting viewpoints from the team and then making the decision as the leader. And sometimes people are slightly confused as to what and when they do. They think that facilitation sometimes, or taking a more facilitative approach, sometimes means a free-for-all, and everyone's gonna have a say, and everyone's ideas is going to get taken forward. And actually, we also need to remember with that, we need to remember that part of facilitation is a synthesis. Like, we can't just leave everything in divergent thinking. We do have to somehow close it down. And whether we use quality criteria, whether it's somebody taking all of that content and making the decision based on their knowledge, something has to happen at some point. So again, it's that thought of, people thinking that collaboration is about being together all the time and everyone's ideas being taken forward. It's not possible to do that. And so that kind of definition, again, I think becomes quite important around, like, when you think about, or when one thinks about collaboration, what do they think it means?
And this brings to my mind that, for me, one of the crucial roles of facilitators is to make the implicit explicit. So what do we actually mean when we speak about collaboration or decision making, or a collaborative approach to decision making? Who is making the decision? And to make this really clear, because I remember in a previous job that I had, there were about lots of French and lots of German employees. And the French are used that nobody is asked and one person takes the decision. The Germans are used to having a discussion first, and then the boss takes the decision. French were invited to join the conversation, to inform the chef, to the boss, to take a decision after. And we're then disappointed that it was not them taking the decision, or that they were not taken into account, but just heard. And I think a lot of frustration can be avoided through a facilitated approach of actually making it explicit.
That's one of the conversations I'm having a lot with clients right now. I find myself speaking about it used to be we'd have to convince them to get lots of perspectives in to make the decision. Now I feel like most of them get that, but then we have to talk about, okay, you've got this big, pool of ideas and opinions. What does it mean to make transparent what happens with those? And if they're willing to make it transparent, that's one thing, but what are you going to see when you open that black box, right? Of whose voices get centered. And so I'm finding myself asking questions at the front end, like, are there like, yes, we're going to listen to a lot of voices, but are there voices that get weighted more heavily than others? Whose voices get centered, whose experiences get centered here? Because it isn't enough just to hear from people, if, especially in situations like you've just described, if that stuff is getting taken away such that the decision gets made elsewhere by someone else or by a smaller group or something, how transparent is that? But also just how conscious are they of how that decision is going to get made in that space? I'm really noticing a shift toward that, in at least in the dialogues that I'm finding myself having with clients right now.
The
Transparency and intentionality, if I can put it that way. So not just show us what's happening, like give us a window in, but also make sure that when that window is open, what people see is what should be happening, that you're making a decision in a way that's defensible, and can stand up to the kind of scrutiny that comes when you add that transparency into the mix. And being explicit about that ahead. Like, so I talk about how to decide before deciding, that kind of stuff.
And do you think that there's a reluctance to take the decision, or there's a reluctance to be transparent about how the decision was taken?
I feel like it's something in between, where there's a lack of self-awareness again, or group awareness of how they are making the decision. There's a willingness to make it. There's a willingness to be seen of how they made it, but they have trouble articulating how they're making it, because they get all this so-called evidence and or opinion in, and then it's not that they don't take that into account, but it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether you could draw a pretty clear line between what people said and what actually gets decided. Because I think at the end of the day, it's often it's a gut check thing more than an evidence informed. It might be an evidence shaped thing, but then there's evidence, opinion, ideas, whatever. And then there's like this leap of mess, intuition, something, and we decide this. And it's that piece that's, we want it to be linear and rational and, easily explained, and it just isn't. And so I would much rather be explicit about that it's messy and intuitive and, somebody gets to make the call, then make it look like there's a really clear line from, people said this. And because I think in maybe collaboration or maybe something else collective, but if you start going just on, say, majority voices, how many people said what, you can end up with a really safe, boring, vanilla kind of answer and miss the magic of that one response that was wise and amazing. And, if we only go, we'll ask the community and see what happens, as if the majority response is the thing to do. So I just think being explicit about how the decision goes from all these ideas to the actual decision is where some of our magic can happen.
And what comes to my mind is the saying that the sum becomes larger than its parts, and that the group is more intelligent than the individual. But I think it doesn't mean that we take all the opinions and all the ideas of the group and put it in a mix, in a blender, and then out comes something that is bigger than everyone else, but that one idea inspires another, and then there might be one person that comes up with a brilliant idea because of the conversation, but it doesn't mean that it's a mix and mash of everyone. And I think that's something that many get wrong.
Yeah.
And I think people are scared of that as well. That's what leaders are scared of, that mishmash and the mess and the different opinions, because they are they're not used to it. Right. They're not used to it. It's a new approach. And I think, part of our role when we're educating or working or coaching is to, it's the phrase, isn't it? Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's what we are there for, to help people know that that's a natural part of the process. I think that I always talk about this cycle of facilitation, asking good questions. If you ask good questions, and you have to be able to listen to what people are saying. And when you listen to what people are saying, you're going to realize that there's going to be lots of different opinions and thoughts and ideas, and that's going to feel uncomfortable. But then you bring it back to the synthesis, because it's your role as the kind of facilitator, the outside observer, to be able to cut through all of that mess and see the patterns and see those those sparks of ideas and reflect that back. And that's how you kind of move through that process of that kind of opening and closing.
And also naming all the things. So it's like you were saying too, Rebecca, that, and I think I totally hear you, Alison, around how it is a different, like leadership. I mean, we really are detoxifying. And when I say we, I just loosely mean like Western culture, detoxifying from some very interesting leadership paradigms. And those are changing. And so it is deeply uncomfortable for leaders to not be the experts and to not know it all and to actually crowdsource. Like that is just scares the shit out of people, for reasons that are partly theirs and partly cultural legacies and, economic legacies and so forth. So I do think naming things, I'm a big fan of naming things. So I will often say, like to your point, Rebecca, about how did this sort of percolation actually result in this, and also how does it connect to the strategy of the company, right? So there's a logic there is a logic there, and I think most people can see that if it's conveyed. But if because I just witnessed this so intimately at this company, their strategy was just all over the place, and as a result, even if they had the earnest intent to communicate why certain decisions were made, they weren't coherent because the strategy was incoherent, but the narrative would have been incoherent regardless. So the company does need a strategy that is makes sense and has logic that they articulate purposefully. And I think that goes back to this sort of transparency and skillful storytelling. Because I think most people, there are always people that are going to want to be the star in the room. Like that's just who they are, and they want that they're the ham, on the stage or whatever. But I do think most people, when you clarify and illuminate for them how it dovetails into this bigger mission they're all on, that they accept it,
Yes.
But it's conveying that with respect and really earnestly thanking them for their contributions, not bullshitting them, but saying like, we genuinely appreciated your energy and meaning it. So the leader has to mean it. And for them to get to that space is a whole other journey,
Right.
Because they're learning on the job, and that's scary, so it's so interesting. So you do strategy, Rebecca, and Alison, you do strategy work too?
Team culture.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
See, Miriam, we could just happy hour it up in Amsterdam,
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
And we're coming to the end of our conversation about collaboration, starting with why are facilitators sometimes the worst collaborators, to what does it actually mean? Maybe it only means collective thinking. And we ended up with leadership and decision making, and how collaboration actually informs leadership and decision making. And then the wet thread being facilitation. And I think we could continue the conversation and follow many different tangents. Also wrote down self-awareness and group awareness. And how much do we actually need one, the other, or both to drive collaboration and consistency? Maybe the input for another conversation.
Well, yeah, and Alison's at the end of her book. I feel like you said you were almost at the end. That's a big time.
Yes, yeah, and it touches on a lot of this stuff actually, which I'm quite excited about this conversation, because it feels like a good time.
What's your book title?
It's called Workshop Culture: A Guide to Building Teams That Thrive.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How can we support it? We need to support it somehow.
Yeah, Sunny, I have got an email drafted that I'm about to send to you, so it's
awesome. Thank you, because I do love supporting authors and women and doing good work. So
and we put all your books and your contacts in the show notes. And why don't we close with a checkout? What are you taking away from the conversation? And also warmly invite our audience to add their takeaways if they wish. Popcorn. Whenever you are ready, you pop.
So I'm taking away so many things, but one that is standing out for me is collaboration is a higher order function. And Sun said that, so yeah.
Thank you, Oda.
Yeah, in our best selves, that's where we're at. Yeah. I love him. You come to all the things, do you? I got to be in a breakout group with him at Festival.
Nice.
For me, a takeaway is what Alison said about in order to collaborate, you need to be really clear on what you're offering and what you bring.
Thank you, Emily.
This has been so lovely. You hit all the high points. Every time I was thinking, oh, but what about, somebody jumped in and added it, and it was beautiful. Self-awareness, purpose, intentionality, clarity, why we're in the room, what we're doing. Those are some of the things that I'm really glad you touched on. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. I'm taking away the richness of other collaborators and authors and writers. I when we were talking earlier about working alone or together, most of the time I am alone. So it's been such a treat to have other people with such really wonderful minds and devoted interests. It gives me wings to try again and keep going, because it's hard work, what we're doing. And it's not always sung. People don't always sing songs about it. And so I'm just taking that in, that I'm like, oh, Rebecca and Alison are my new friends. It just makes me feel good. So thank you, Miriam. Always. You have a special gift. And I was trying to identify like what it might be, because I saw it again in the Festival too. I mean, I know you have many, but there's something really important that you bring that is ineffable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Curiosity has something to do with deep curiosity.
I think for me, it's just been really fun. And I think, underlining what Sun said, we often, what we do is we do the thing and we don't often talk about the thing, but we just do it. So it's really nice to be in a space where we get to like really go deep and play around and bounce and challenge. It's been great. Yeah, so I think my takeaway is I probably just need to do a bit more of this.
Yeah, exactly. And also we all need to color coordinate our bookshelves.
I was thinking about something that one of you said earlier about when collaboration is going well, we do better work, right? And I think about this being an example of that I don't think it would quite meet our litmus test of, is it real collaboration? I'm not sure if the podcast output counts as a joint outcome. Maybe this is just collective thinking. I don't even know. But if that's all it is, then that was still great. Like I feel like there's not enough sort of that. I think one of you said sparring partner. It's a little more sort of perhaps combative than I mean, but just having thinking partners that can kind of make our ideas better. That's a gift, and that's a piece of working primarily alone that I think I miss, and I need to create more opportunities for social learning, formally and informally. So I really treasure the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I love this conversation, and what I'm taking away is that there's no one way to do it. We all have our special ways, and it's not black or white. It's not I do it alone, I do it in collaboration. There's so many nuances, and I feel so much richer and so much more comfortable also that it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Like how we do it is okay.
Yeah. And so much food for thought. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Dum, da, da, dum. I think that's it.
Woo!